Good day everyone, I am JEA Jade HIERRO, and in this video, I'm going to discuss to you the historical foundation of education. According to Jane Potok on the Vitas Harp, everything is a past, everything a person, an object, a word, everything. If you don't know the past, you can understand the present and plan properly for the future. Today's discussion, you will know the aims, types of education, content to be studied, agencies of education, organization of grade levels, their methods of instructions, financing, and their outstanding contributions to education from 7000 BC to 70 AD. In the ancient times, there were different eras of education. And these are the following: the primitive education, the Sumerian education, the early Egyptian, the early Hindu, the early Chinese, and the early Hebrew education. Therefore, to know this all, let's travel back to ancient times. Are you ready? Let's go! The primitive education. It is around 7000 BC to 5000 BC. There were three aims the primitive education held. First, security and survival. This was to prepare the young to secure himself and his family and to appease the good spirits that controlled his existence. Conformity. Since this is the basic for social security, conformity brought together families, clans, tribes so that they could conquer common dangers. Preservation and transmission of traditions to the incoming generations. The types of education is informal since it is done at home or in their environment. In the informal way of teaching, vocational and religious were the focus. They believed in animistic, the respect for trees, rocks, the sun, and everything surrounds them, gave rise to the earliest religion. The contents they studied were survival and superstition. They were taught to stay alive, to protect oneself and his family from the destructive forces of nature, both human and divine. Superstitions because there's no philosophies yet. They were also taught how to worship before the dwelling of an unseen spirit such as big tree, a big rock, a river, and a big bush. Home and environment were their agencies of education. Homes are always the center of the learning, especially for the young, and the environment, for instance, if one happened to step on a thorn and got hurt, he now became careful not to step on thorn. There is no organization of grade levels. There was no gradations in instruction, neither were there organized classes. They had four methods of instructions. Number 1 is informal, since their teachers are not strangers, but rather their immediate community. Number 2, observation and imitation, doing and observing basic technical practices. Number 3, simple telling and demonstration. And number 4, participation. Simple telling and demonstration, this is lecture, so it is the demonstration nowadays. Participation, children participated in the work of their parents and they learned. There was no financing involved since there was no teacher to pay, no learning materials to buy. The primitive man started the rudiments of education from which evolved the modern educational systems of today. Sumerian education 5000 BC to 4000 BC.
Sumerians were commercial people. What were the aims of this Sumerian education?
The first one was the training of scribes, where they trained to do ecclesiastical work in temples, but mostly writing. The second one was training of bookkeepers to record their multifarious business transactions. Number 3, training of teachers. And number 4, training the learners to be good and to do good. Types of education: writing, mathematical education, language, vocational, professional, and art education. Sumerians had little arithmetic, including counting and operations of low-digit numbers. For language, little grammar, giving names to many things. Apprenticeship for the workers. For the vocational education, medicine and surgery,
Law and architecture for professional education, and poetry, epics, essays, fables, music, jewelry designing, sculpture and architecture for art education.
content to be studied, reading, writing, little arithmetic.
Astronomy for predicting the planting and reaping seasons, astrology, medicine and surgery, architecture, agriculture and hydraulics, art, vocational training includes carpentry, etc. And in law, some simple rules and regulations to be obeyed. Agencies of education: home, school, temple school, and apprentice schools.
Schools were consisted of 6 rooms with walls 8 to 9 feet high. Temple schools were more elaborate than schools. They had big halls. Apprentice schools, schools for highly skilled craftsmen in beautiful artworks in gold, silver, and copper, sculpture, architecture, and in metal works. There were already organized classes as far as 3000 BC. There was higher education for professions and for those who can afford it. Education was not universal.
Methods of instruction. First, imitation and copying what the teacher had written and followed by a minimal explanation. Number 2, preparation of tablets, the main works of the learners that dealt with their lessons.
For financing, large amount had to be spent for higher education.
Outstanding contribution. Sumerians' outstanding contribution to education and especially to civilization was its cuneiform writing.
Early Egyptian education, 3000 BC to 300 BC. Government was autocratic, ruled by a king called Pharaoh. These were the aims of this Egyptian education. First, training of scribes. In those days, scribes was a profession. Second, religious. Inculcated proper respect for the gods and the pharaoh. Third, utilitarian. The mother and the father wanted to transfer their skills in his occupation and her skills in keeping the house. The domestic trainings, religious, and vocational professional types dominated. And the fourth, preservation of cultural patterns. Types of education. Religious education, to inculcate in the minds of the learners the proper respect for the gods, moral conduct, and the preparation for life after death. Professional type of education. They wanted to perpetuate the artistic skills that embellished their temples. Military was only for the sons of the nobles. Priesthood for those who aspired to be a priest. Writing, reading, and language education. And education for public administrators. Contents to be studied. The contents to be studied were reading, writing, language, religion, artistry, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, architecture, physics, medicine, embalming, dentistry, law, music, arts, physical education, and military. Agencies of education: home, temple schools, Temple schools for higher education, especially engineering, architecture, medicine, dentistry, etc. Military schools, only for the sons of nobles, for defense and aggression. Art school, for those aspiring for a public office and those who taking up law. Vocational schools, schools of arts and trade. Organization of grade levels. The young studied at home, mother as a teacher. At age 5, the boys attended the writing schools if the parents could afford to pay the school fees. Age 17, the boys entered the schools that offered their vocations. Methods of instruction. First, apprenticeship. Dominant method in lower and vocational schools. Dictation, memorization, copying, imitation, repetition. Those were standard practices in teaching, especially in lower grades. Number 3, observation and participation. Flagging was used to penalize failure to learn. Financing. The pupils and students had to pay a certain amount of school fees even in lower schools. Hence, education was not universal. Outstanding contribution to education. Their outstanding contributions were probably the geometrical measurement and surveying. They were the first to use these two mathematical techniques. Early Hindu education around 3000 BC. The aims of early Hindu education were intellectual, for excellent intellectual development, knowledge and contemplation for philosophical truth. Religious, to prepare for the future life and to seek perfection. Cultural, to preserve the caste system through the use of precedent, history, and strict observance. Types of education. Number 1. Religious. Development of spiritual and emotional attitudes rather than the acquisition of new knowledge. Number 2. Intellectual, for priest and teacher so that they can impact the religious tenets, hymns, and prayers. Number 3. Vocational, for the artisan, agriculturists, farmers, and laborers. Number 4. Domestic, for women to serve their husband and their child. Number 5. Military education, for the military caste. Contents to be studied. First, literature for the Brahmins. Second, astronomy, history, grammar, law, mathematics, medicine, contemporary arithmetical notation, including the symbol zero, and algebra. Third, dancing associated with religion. Fourth, sports such as wrestling, archery, and yoga. Fifth, linguistic, philosophy, and theology. Number 6, military training, use of the horse, elephants, and chariots in war. Agencies of education. Home, the child was taught by the mother till the age 5. Outdoors, less than 15 pupils. Classes were held under large trees. Monasteries was later organized by higher schooling. Organization of grade levels. The child was taught at home till age 5. At age 5, the child attended higher schools. The women were given only domestic education. Methods of instruction, imitation, and memorization. Financing. The teacher or gurus were remunerated by means of gifts from parents of the children. Until now, we Filipinos call our teachers guru. Outstanding contribution to education was the decimal system of arithmetical notation. Early Chinese education, 3000 BC to 1900 AD. Ancient China followed the policy of isolation. They have no fear for invasion, for they have no intention to conquer. This country did not care to associate with the rest of the world, but instead desire to live unto self. Aims of education. One of the aims of early Chinese education is ideological and ethical or moral learning. Education was focused on Confucius' 5 fundamental relationships and cultural development and civil services. Chinese education has 5 types of education. First, ideological and moral education. This is where the Confucian relationship, doctrines of submissions, and cardinal virtues. Second, language education. The Chinese language has to be mastered or memorized for it has characters. Third, vocational and domestic education. Trade skills had to be acquired by men while women focused in domestic skills for they have to serve men and bear children. Fourth, civic education. The type of education was for those who would like to serve in the government. Fifth, military education. This was for the defense and aggression purposes. Contents to be studied, maxims and doctrines, ethical and political nature. Agencies of education, home, private schools, house of teacher or rich pupil, deserted pagoda or any place. Methods of instruction were Confucian method, direct and exact imitation, and memorization. Organization of grade levels. First, elementary. Training was formal and vigorous. Second, higher education, preparation for taking the government examinations. Financing. Pupils or learners paid tuition fees. And the last, outstanding contribution to education was the administration of civil service examination. Early Hebrew education from 1250 BC to 70 AD. Hebrews were the desert nomads, established a great kingdom called Israel. These were the aims of early Hebrew education. Develop ideas, morals, and concepts, preparation for destiny, holiness, and observance of religion. Types of education: religious, civic, vocational, democratic, human relations, and physical education. Contents to be studied. Number 1. History of the Hebrews and God's relationship with them. Number 2. The Jewish or the Mosaic Law, or what we call the Bible. Number 3. Proverbs and Psalms. Number 4. Explanations of festivities. Number 5. Music, both sacred and common. Number 6. Reading and writing. And number 7. Foreign language. Agencies of education. The first one is home. It is where the center of education. Both parents share responsibility for educating their children. Number 2, public school, temple, institutions for lay prophets, and schools or colleges for scribe. Organization of grade levels. Elementary education, ages 6 up, and compulsory to all male children. Higher education for lay prophets, rabbis, and scribes. Methods of instruction: exposition, temple worship, oral, audio-visual aids, and memorization, which they use mnemonic rolls were devised to help the child retain what he memorized. Financing. The teachers were not paid regularly but allowed to receive gifts from the parents of their children. And the last, outstanding contribution to education: monotheism, 10 Commandments, and the Bible. Before I will end this discussion, let me leave to you this quote.
According to Theodore Roosevelt, the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. And once again, I am JEA Jade HIERRO, your discussant for these topics. And thank you so much for watching.